What is the Schomburg Center? To me, it is home. The place where we come to see who we really are, not just somebody else's reflection of who we are.
The Schomburg Center is a place of culture, it's a place of history, it's a place of knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is a repository of all of the things that has documented our sense of worth as a people.
For me, that means that it is a place of immense power.
The Schomburg Center is a public research library and a cultural institution
for the study of the Pan-African world.
It is perhaps the best in the world.
My Schomburg Center is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg.
Arturo Schomburg said, Black history and culture and intellect exists at a time when most people didn't believe that. He collected those evidences, and that became the beginning of the collection.
And it has expanded and has grown to where it is now a world-class institution.
It holds over 10 million items.
There's no parallel anywhere that brings to light what we as people of color have done, what we continue to do.
Black culture is all of culture. The universals that animate everyone's life happen here for all people.
The Schomburg for me is one of the center pillars of Harlem. When I started the journey of finding out about Red Rooster and Harlem, the very first place I went to was the Schomburg.
Researchers from around the world come and use what we have here.
I could not have written just about any of the books that I've written without the Schomburg Center's archives, resources.
The Schomburg Center is much more than a library. We encourage lifelong learning and exploration.
The Junior Scholars Program is a Saturday program with students from 5th grade to senior year in high school to help them learn about Black history and culture.
Learning about my history is important because it teaches me who I am.
The Schomburg Junior Scholars Program is going to do nothing but uplift them.
So many talented and brilliant people have walked the corridors of this amazing institution over the years. From Octavia Butler to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ella Fitzgerald, Alvin Ailey, and Harry Belafonte, who graced the stage in this room of the American Negro Theater.
This place evokes great memories. It was a gift to us in our community to really try to find that space to reflect expressions of Black experience. I just knew that the environment, what I saw these young African Americans doing, was a place I needed to be.
What is my Schomburg Center? I'm standing here at the Cosmogram, which underneath holds the ashes of the poet Langston Hughes. On the evening when this Cosmogram was dedicated, people began to empty out of the auditorium. A jazz trio struck up, and to my amazement, Amira Baraka went over and asked Maya Angelou for a dance. And they started to dance on top of the Cosmogram, on top of the ashes of Langston Hughes, and I felt what a fitting way to kiss the memory of Langston.
The Schomburg Center is a research institute and a library, but it's so much more than that.
There's something going on every day.
So many amazing people come here to talk about their creative craft, to share what inspires them. The Schomburg Center's collections help to tell stories even beyond our walls.
The Schomburg Center is here in this exhibition at MoMA, One-Way Ticket, Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series. We depend on the resources of the Schomburg to enable us to tell this story. Thinking about the implications of the past on the present is absolutely crucial for understanding the next steps, understanding what we have to do to go forward.
We today have the responsibility of making sure that new artists and activists, new scholars and poets know that this place continues to be a resource and a source of inspiration for the work that we must continue to do.
The Schomburg Center is knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is education.
The Schomburg Center is home, it is family, it is foundational.
The Schomburg Center is inspiration.
The Schomburg is with me in everything that I do.
Community, inside and out.
The Schomburg Center is us.
The Schomburg Center is you, and we invite each and every one of you to find your Schomburg Center.
Good evening, everyone. We did ask facilities to turn down the air conditioning to make it slightly more comfortable. I know some of you are cuddling up to make it through. Welcome to the Conversations in Black Freedom Studies series. Tonight we have a film screening of an amazing documentary, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, followed by a discussion. If you don't know, the Conversations in Black Freedom Studies series of events is in its 11th season. It's amazing. It's a monthly series on the first Thursday of the month at this same place and time, although usually it's 6:30, sometimes virtual, sometimes in person, here at the Schomburg Center. And it's always about new works in Black social movement history. If you don't know the book on which this film is based, you see the film, but you always got to read the book. This is an amazing book by Professor Jean Theoharis, who's with us tonight and will be speaking after the film. And I want to let you know that there are signed copies of the book in the Schomburg shop, which is just to the side, by the way you entered this building. If you don't know where the shop is, it's by the entrance, actually, if you go back that way. Signed copies of the original book, and there's a very popular YA edition, that's young adult edition for like 12 and up. Unfortunately, the filmmaker, Yoruba Richen, won't be able to join us for the conversation tonight, but we'll also have co-curator of this series, Robin Spencer Antoine, with us. And lastly, I just want to mention, although after the film you'll hear a little bit more about this, for those educators in the room, there is a whole curriculum about Rosa Parks and delving more deeply into her story, as you're about to see, that is ready for you to use in the classroom. And speaking of the classroom, my job at the New York Public Library is that I'm the director of a new division of the library called the Center for Educators and Schools, whose purpose is to serve up all of the amazing resources of the library to educators and schools. You can find us back here at the Schomburg Center, actually on Election Day. If you want a credit-bearing program for educators on the topic of defending Black studies in the classroom, including some free book giveaways and a new curriculum, a new Black history curriculum that uses primary sources from the library's archives, come to us here. Mark your calendar for Tuesday, November 7th. We'll be here with Kianga Yamada-Taylor and Kimberly Crenshaw, not to be missed. And lastly, there are some items related to Rosa Parks' life and career on display in our flagship, in the library's flagship exhibition downtown at the Stephen A. Schwartzman building. And the Center for Educators and Schools is offering you teachers, a program through which you can bring your students on field trips to come see that exhibition. And if you're interested, we can highlight those Rosa Parks items as part of the experience. So now, as they say in the movies, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thank you.
I'm so grateful to be here with you this evening. The first thing I want to do is welcome you to Conversation in Black Freedom Studies. This is what we do. All of the emotions and feelings that you're feeling, all the knowledge that you've taken in, this is what we do as a public education program here at the Schomburg Library. I want to introduce myself, the program to you, and then dive into a wonderful conversation with the scholar whose wonderful book on Rosa Parks was adapted into this film, Dr. Jean Theoharis. But first, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So welcome to the season opener of Conversation in Black Freedom Studies, an educational series started by Dr. Kamosi Woodard and Dr. Jean Theoharis in collaboration with the Schomburg Center over a decade ago to create a space where the public could engage with new works in Black social movement history. So I welcome you tonight in this room, and I welcome everyone who's joining now through the live stream. I'm Robin Spencer Antoine, a historian who joined the series as co-curator a few years ago. Please follow us at Schomburg CBFS or at our website, blackfreedomstudies.org, for our other offerings this year. We're thrilled to start off the season with a screening and talk back about the book and the film, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. Well, raise your hand if you learned something you didn't know about Rosa Parks tonight. Well, scholar Vincent Harding once said, if you know, you owe. So I want to start off by looking at a website that was created with teaching materials, because you know, if you know, you owe. We definitely have materials specific to people who are educators for a profession who would like to take Rosa Parks and the knowledge gained tonight into their classroom. There is the book, The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks. There's also the youth version as well. And there's also a wonderful website, the front of which is here today. If you just go to zeneducationprojects.org, you'll find the website and a teacher's guide with many, many wonderful lessons so that you can teach about Rosa Parks within your family, to your coworkers, to your peers, to anyone, because I know I learned so much about Rosa Parks tonight that I didn't know. And I know that you still feel the same. So there's a wonderful resource guide on teaching Rosa Parks created by the Zen Education Project. So I want to call that out, and I want to remind you again to go to the website and learn more. There are wonderful age-appropriate lessons there. And of course, as mentioned earlier, there's also a young adult version of this book, The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks, for the young person in your life. Now I want to take the opportunity to bring out Dr. Jean Theoharis. You saw her in the film. She'll be here with us tonight, and we'll be in conversation together. So Jean Theoharis is Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York, and the co-author or author of 11 books on the civil rights and Black Power movements and the contemporary politics of race in the United States. Her widely acclaimed biography, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, won a 2014 NAACP Image Award, the Letitia Woods Brown Award from the Association of Black Women Historians as well. It's been adapted into the wonderful documentary that you saw this evening that was directed by Joanna Hamilton, Yoruba Richen, and executive produced by Soledad O'Brien for NBC Peacock, where she served as consulting producer. The film has won many awards, a Peabody, a Gracie for Historical Documentary, a Television Academy Honors Award, and her young adult adaptation with Brandy Colbert, The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks for Young People, was included in one of the best books. Her book, A More Beautiful and Terrible History, The Uses and Misuses of Civil Rights History, won the 2018 Brooklyn Public Library Literary Prize in Nonfiction. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, The Atlantic, Boston Review, and the Chronicle of Higher Education, and many others. You can find Dr. Theoharis here in the building the first Thursday of every month or online, co-curating the series with me, where we bring the latest books and sometimes films and sometimes articles as well on the Black freedom struggle in the United States and around the world to audiences nationwide and even worldwide. I'm so thrilled to start this discussion. We have a lot to dive into. I have so much to say.
I know. It's so exciting to be here.
First of all, I almost feel like I have to do a roll call of some of the people that we saw in the film that you may not have really put together in that way, from Joanne Little to Raymond Parks to Edie Nixon, Virginia Durr, Fannie Lou Hamer, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King, Gloria Richardson, Dorothy Aldridge, Malcolm X, Amari Obadeli, Joanne Little. We learned so much tonight. So the first thing I want to ask Eugene is, why Rosa Parks? I guess as authors, there's a world of topics and projects that we can immerse ourselves into. What drew you to the life of Mrs. Rosa Parks?
So it's so wonderful to be here. It's like, coming home with the film. And as Robin was saying, this is our 11th year at Conversations, and so it's wonderful to get to bring the film here to the Schomburg. So my journey to writing the book actually begins where the film ends, with her funeral. And I think if people remember, right, this incredible honor, right, unprecedented. She's the first woman, the first civilian ever to lie in honor in the Capitol. Only 2 years ago, with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do we see a second woman. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, I think many of us were sort of transfixed by this, but at the same time, what was being honored, how she was being honored just got smaller and smaller. She was constantly referred to as quiet, not angry, quiet, humble, quiet, soft-spoken, quiet. And what she did was really reduced to that one day on the bus. And so I gave a talk about how we memorialize the civil rights movement, because I didn't think we could separate why we had that natural funeral from Rosa Parks from what had happened 2 months earlier, which was Hurricane Katrina. And federal negligence during and after the storm had laid rise to a kind of burgeoning conversation in this country about present racial injustice. And having a national funeral for Rosa Parks was a way, in many ways, as we see all these congressional leaders like stampede, right, both sides of the aisle, in many ways to put more palatable images in front of the country. So like, look, we're taking racism seriously, but it's in the past. Look how far we've come. This woman who was denied a seat on the bus, she's in the Capitol. What a country we are. So a friend asked me to turn that talk into an article for a book she was doing. So I said to myself, okay, now I need to flesh out who Rosa Parks actually was. And I had loved her young adult autobiography called Rosa Parks, My Story. But then I was thinking to myself, well, there must be a good biography. Why am I not thinking of it? Like, well, maybe it came out like in the 80s. So I start to look. And there's no serious footnoted biography of Rosa Parks. And this seemed to correspond to what we'd seen in the funeral, right? On the one hand, honoring her, and on the other hand, not seeing her as fit for a kind of serious biography. There were children's books, there were high school books, but no, there was one small book for adults written by a serious biographer, but not in a serious way, and no footnoted biography. And so that really is where it begins. And over in this process, and when Yoruba Richen and Johanna Hamilton came to me about making a film, they too were surprised that there had never been a full-length film on her.
It's amazing. I mean, when I was watching the film, I thought about how she's oftentimes sort of hollowed out and placed, almost taking away her humanity, her power, her strength, the woman who fought off her attacker. You know, the woman who was talking about armed self-defense, the woman who said one of my favorite lines, never, never, never if you remember that from one of her letters. So that's very powerful. Can you talk to us a little bit about the history of this film? Like when it came out, what's happened since then, et cetera?
Yeah, so it begins, one of the things that I do, as many of you know, on her birthday, on December 1st, is I often do a long Twitter thread of things you don't know about Rosa Parks. Just trying to find different ways to push through kind of what always feels like a tidal wave of misinformation about her. And so in February 2019, I do one of those threads, and a documentary filmmaker that I knew a little bit, Johanna Hamilton, reads the thread and is just stunned by all the things that she didn't know, even though she considered herself, she was a well-read, serious person, filmmaker. And so she reaches out and she says, is somebody making a documentary? And I said no. And then she talked to Yoruba, and Yoruba was also astonished. And so that's where the journey begins in 2019. And then about a year later, we met with Soledad O'Brien, and her team came on board. And then we made, and one of the exciting things is that I got a seat at the table. And that was really important to me. And so I got to be a consulting producer. And so when we sold it to NBC Peacock, they put up the money to make it. But so that happens in the summer of 2021, but they want it done really fast because they want it out for Black History Month, which doesn't actually happen, and they come to realize this is a bigger deal, and so it actually comes out, it premieres at Tribeca in 2022, and then it's now showing on NBC Peacock. So if you want to share it with friends, or you can show it in your class, it's streaming on NBC Peacock. Peacock is the streaming platform of NBC. Mm-hmm. You can get it on your TV. So that was kind of the journey to, so we ended up having to make it, and if Yoruba was here, she would talk more about just what it meant to sort of try to put this film together in such a short time. And of course, to me, I would have loved it to be a miniseries, because I can think of so many things that we leave on the cutting room floor, so many parts of the story that aren't there, that we had amazing footage of, that we had amazing interviews of. But it's really exciting. And I think the thing I like most about it, and I would be curious to see people's hands, how many people could have called up a Rosa Parks voice in your head before watching the film? A couple people. I mean, I think most of us could recognize Rosa Parks, but I think, like you're saying, the kind of hollowed outness, part of it is we don't know what she sounds like, and we don't know what her ideas sound like in her own voice. And that, to me, is part of what was one of the most moving parts of the film for me.
Yes, I loved that. I loved hearing her. I loved her words being read by Lisa Gay Hamilton. I felt like that was it just brought her to life in a really multifaceted way, because I think that Rosa Parks has been sort of presented to us as almost docile. Right. Right?
Yep.
But yet there she was. I mean, she was such a fighter.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I loved about the film, well, I have a couple of things, but just the showing of her family members, the role of her partner in life, her husband, the ways that people who were in her life saw her and loved on her, and all of that. Because sometimes they will give you people sort of separate from the community, right? But here was Rosa Parks, in community, in a family. And that to me was very, very, very powerful. Other favorite moments or favorite things that you enjoyed about the film?
Well, I mean, I love where you started, which is that we got to show many, not all, right? So So many other people were very important to Rosa Parks. Ella Baker mentored Rosa Parks. Septima Clark mentored Rosa Parks. One of her longtime friends is Queen Mother Moore, right? But we got to see all these people who both kind of help Rosa Parks become Rosa Parks, right? Because I think one of the other things that we often, the civil rights movement kind of exists up here, like somehow people are made for it and they know what to do and they're sort of separate. And I think the kind of role of meeting Raymond, the role of meeting E.D. Nixon and working with Johnny Carr and going to Highlander, right? And the ways that that changes her. I've always loved the story of her and Malcolm X, right? They meet for the first time in 1963 because he wants to meet her. He's come to Detroit, right? He's going to give them what we now know as the Message to the Grassroots speech, right? To speak to the Grassroots Leadership Conference. And he puts out the word among friends that he wants to meet her. And I think that idea of also, it changes not just how we see her, but how we see him, right? Because like activists need other activists, right? Courage needs courage. And so I think in that relationship of like huge admiration, she would go on to describe Malcolm X as her personal hero, right? Is that shared recognition and that shared kind of sustenance you get from another like person of courage. And so I liked how we got to see that here. I love some of the places where we get to hear kind of her understated but feistiness, right? One of my favorites is towards the end, right? You have that interviewer going on about hostility in the South, and then she just cuts right in, and the North, right? She's not going to let him just go on. And so I think we get to see that side of her that is, that's just like, no. And so I love that part.
Yes, I think oftentimes we get frozen, people get frozen in moments, right? And to see Rosa Parks in Detroit, to see Rosa Parks in the 70s, in the 80s, to see her traveling the world with renowned leaders, even some of the pop culture figures that we see Rosa Parks with, Tyra Banks and other people, just gives you a sense that she was revered. People understood who she was, what she meant, and what she had done. And that to me seemed really, really, really powerful. One of my favorite parts is when she finally gets health insurance. There is such a pragmatism over and a pain around her economic struggles. Like Rosa Parks was suffering. Some of the people that we hold up so high could be in struggle and not able to, own her own home or anything like that. That was really, really moving to think that, wow, Rosa Parks got health insurance, and that, you can imagine what that could mean in a life, that she could, especially as someone who was aging, finally like take care, of herself. And she took care of a lot of people, her mother, losing her husband and her brother. Is really humanizing. I think you could really relate to her on so many different levels.
No, I mean, that period, so she loses her job 5 weeks into the boycott, right? Never finds steady work again. Raymond, as we saw, is forced to resign his job. So they spend the whole boycott, that whole year, basically without steady work. And even the success of the boycott doesn't mean that they can find a job. But then it continues in Detroit. And she develops ulcers during the boycott that get worse. And so part of the kind of miracle of health insurance is Rosa Parks actually ends up in the hospital in late 1959, and they have a bill they can't pay. And so they go into collections. And so to have health insurance is, right, like just gets that sort of, I mean, the chapter in the middle of the book that's on this decade of suffering was probably the hardest to write because it was this like seeing this kind of, again, many years of, hardship. And then, right, the kind of John Conyers really is a hero in that chapter of just kind of, she plays this huge role in his campaign, but then he hires her and that gives us stability. And it's basically, we saw a tiny bit in the film, but if you look at their income tax records, it's not till a year after, so a full year of the job with Conyers in '66, that they record an income comparable to what they have in 1955. And in 1955, they're living in the projects, they don't own a car, they obviously don't own a home, right? But still, it takes till 1966 to get even back to where they were.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Talk to me about what was left on the cutting room floor. I feel like there's so many other things that I've seen come out about Rosa Parks. There's wonderful work by Dr. Stephanie Evans on Rosa Parks and yoga, and like how self-care became part of her sort of survival strategy. Yeah. I know everything can't go into this one capsule called this documentary film, which is why you have to read the book. But what was left on the cutting room floor?
Right, well, I mean, the yoga's left on the cutting room floor, the kind of, we got to see one of my favorite quotes, Joanne Watson, right? And Joanne Watson joined the Ancestors this year. So some of this is like thank God we got to interview Joanne Watson when we did. So she talks about Rosa Parks being holistic, right? It's not either or, it's both and. And that was true of her spiritual life too. So she, in kind of the 1960s, so she's in her 50s, kind of starts doing yoga with her nieces and nephews. She gets really into it. There's some beautiful pictures at the Library of Congress website you can see of Rosa Parks doing yoga. But then, a bit later, right, when she's more in her 70s and 80s, she gets introduced to Buddhist meditation. She meets a kind of Buddhist scholar. She actually gets to go to Japan. It's her only trip, kind of cross-ocean trip that she ever gets to take. And so she then adds, Rosa Parks is an everyday Christian. She reads her Bible every day. She prays every day. Her spiritual life is very key to like both sustaining her politics, but just sustaining her personally. But then in her later years, she adds meditation to that. And she sees no contradiction between adding Buddhist meditation to that kind of Christian prayer and Bible reading. And so again, that sort of both and. There's so much left. There were so many great things. We had amazing footage. So you saw Erica Huggins very briefly talking about the March on Washington. So Rosa Parks visits the Black Panther Party school. We had amazing footage of that, both of Erica's interview, but also footage from the news when she does so. I mean, that decade before the bus boycott, they're working on so many cases. They work on this case of a young 16-year-old who is young man by the name of Jeremiah Reeves, who's falsely accused of, he's having a relationship with a young white woman, and then it gets found out, and so she cries rape, and he gets arrested, and then he is put on the electric chair and forced to confess, a little bit like the Central Park Five. And Rosa Parks will spend years and Edie Nixon trying to protect him from being executed, and he's ultimately, when he turns 22, executed. So Jeremiah Reeves is on the cutting room floor. We had done, Rosa Parks was a huge believer in reparations. There was a really nice segment we had. Queen Mother Moore, as I mentioned, was a longtime friend, and a section on Rosa Parks' work on reparations, so that gets cut. As much as we saw of Detroit, there was so much more. So many more campaigns, so much more of kind of Black power, both on the ground in Detroit, but also all of the different, she attends the 1968 Black Power Conference in Philly. That picture of her holding the Malcolm X poster is from the Gary Convention. She's on staff at the Gary Convention. So it could have been a miniseries, but we obviously got a lot to see.
Yes, I have a few more questions for you. Then we're going to open up to questions from the audience. So be stewing on those things. I guess I wanted to ask about the sources, the archives, because it feels so important to have the tangible materials that can allow us to tell this full story of Rosa Parks. That's why I love the conversation about what is left on the cutting room floor, because sometimes you see something like this and you think, now I know it all. to realize it's still just the tip of the iceberg. So talk to us about some of those sources and the archives for this project. And I want to say, I think that some of those are in use as primary sources in the teacher's guide.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And so if you go to Zin Ed Project, one of the things that we tried to do is also to have a variety of primary sources. There's also, we made a website, even before we did the teacher's guide, rosaparksbiography.org, that also has kind of the story and some primary sources. So in many ways, Rosa Parks was sort of hidden in plain sight. And so the journey to the book was about kind of sewing together all of these threads. The Black press was incredibly useful because I could then place her in all these movements and all these places. I went through the NAACP records. I went through, lots the Highlanders records. I did a lot of that kind of organizational archival work. But one of the difficulties was that so much of the interviews of Rosa Parks, even when they were sitting there in Detroit, even when they're sitting there in Conyers' office, literally only talk about Montgomery. And then that seemed like it had something to do with gender too, right? Because it seems to me that if you had a civil rights activist turned congressional aide who was a man, you would think to be like, well, what do you think of what Congressman Conyers is doing about Vietnam, or what Congressman Conyers, but they don't ask. And so part of telling the second half was I did a lot of oral histories with a lot of different people to try to, again, get all of these strands of the story, particularly because we were so used to, even those of us who knew some of that stuff before, right? The Highlander, some of the NAACP stuff, we'd really cut it off. And so usually the last sentence of little biographies of Rosa Parks would be, then she moves to Detroit, and then sort of basically, and then she lives happily ever after, right? And it's no, there's 40 years and all of this work, and all of this family life. And so that took a lot of oral histories. And so then when the film, we were relying on many of the relationships that I had built in terms of writing the book. We then went back to, sadly, many people I interviewed for the book passed away in those years. So one very sad thing, literally, we had started to send out the very first, and I had emailed Gloria Richardson, and people have been with us at Conversations for a while know we had Gloria Richardson here. And it was the day she died. And her daughter wrote me the next day and said, my mom passed on. So we didn't get to have Gloria Richardson. We obviously got to hear her words from Democracy Now! So some of those, we were able to, again, go back to some of those, some of the people who'd been so useful to me in terms of telling the story, like Dorothy and Dan Aldridge, like Joanne Watson, to be able to fill out the film.
Definitely, and I feel like it makes me also want to just issue a call to speak to the elders, right, and capture their stories and the times that they've seen, the things they've done, et cetera. It's so, so precious. Well, let's talk about the film in this contemporary moment, because you kind of get that throughout the documentary, right? There's, especially around voting rights.
Right.
But there's so many, I think, lessons to distill from Rosa Parks' life, her rebellious life. How can we begin to kind of take this film out of history and make it into something that we could live with and learn from and utilize in our daily?
So I think one of the worst things we've done to the civil rights movement, in the way that this country sometimes memorializes it in the past handful of years, is used it falsely against contemporary movements. So there's this idea, right, kind of often lobbed at young Black Lives Matter activists, like, you should be more like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, right? You're not doing it the right way. You're reckless. You're too angry. You're dangerous, right? And most of those criticisms are criticisms that were waged against King and Parks for years. And we got to see, obviously, just a touch of the hate mail that Rosa Parks got when she worked in Conyers' office. And so to me, part of understanding who Rosa Parks was understanding, which we got to see in the film, how much she valued the militancy of young people, the spirit of young people. And at crucial moments when she begins to despair of her peers, like in the mid-50s, like she then turns to like basically like rejuvenating the youth branch of the chapter in 1954, which we saw Doris Crenshaw, and then that happens during Black Power as well. And so she loved and stood with the kind of militancy of young people. You know, we saw Dan Aldridge in the film say he was worried when he asked her, will she serve on the People's Tribunal around police brutality? And she's like, yeah, I'm glad you asked. And Ed Vaughn, who we saw, who owned the bookstore, the first Black bookstore in Detroit, he told me, you know, basically she was everywhere, and she basically would be like, if I can be useful, I will come. And so I think really remembering who, not just who she was, but what she stood for, I think goes a long way in terms of how we see this moment and the kind of new surge of activism that we are in the midst of. And I should say, there are some notes at the Library of Congress from when she's giving speeches during the Montgomery bus boycott, and she's talking about how she's reading about Mary McLeod Bethune, and she's reading about Sojourner Truth, and she's sort of sustaining herself by seeing the ways that she stands on the shoulders of other freedom fighters. And so to me, part of the point of the book and the point of the film is to sort of then see that continuing struggle, see the way that she was absolutely adamant to the end of her life. The movement's not over, there's much more work, right? And so the ways that young people today stand on her shoulders, right? And she would be very proud to have that. And so I think that's one of the really important, I think, messages of the book and the film.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that and putting that so beautifully. I want to highlight that one of the takeaways for me is how sexual violence was front and center along with desegregation and voting rights and anti-violence and the anti-Klan, the things that we're used to thinking about in this period, that Rosa Parks was concerned about sexual violence in a longue durée, right, in many different instances. And she didn't see that as something separate. No. She saw it as part and parcel of the movement. And it's nice to think about Rosa Parks as like a universally beloved figure, but it seems to me that she faced patriarchy, discrimination against her because she was a woman. And I think that's something to think about as well as we herald who can be a leader and whose voice do we want to hear. One of the most striking moments for me was at the March on Washington, where Rosa Parks is seen but not seen, right? Acknowledged on the program but not given a voice. And it's other women who go and they take her around to sort of put the spotlight back on her so she can share her history, her knowledge, etc. So she kind of gives us that movement inside the movement idea. She allows us to think more critically about the interior of the movement. I want to invite audience members who are in the room and audience members who are out in the world of the internet to engage, whether it be in the chat if you're on YouTube or come to the mic if you're in the building. We'd love to hear your questions and comments. We have about 20 minutes for some engagement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the incredible film. I'm just wondering about the footage that you have. Are you like locked into an agreement with Peacock, or can you go to Netflix and have part 2?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure we could have part 2. I think that if someone wanted to do a bigger kind of mini, I mean, clearly with Malcolm, right, we've seen various different kinds of documentary projects, including that like 6-part, like Who Killed Malcolm, that really fleshed out some of his history. So I don't think this stands in the way of other projects. I don't think Peacock, so it will live on Peacock. I'm not sure. As of now, they're saying it won't like be on Amazon or iTunes because they want to have it streaming on their platform.
I'm more specifically talking about the footage that you didn't.
We didn't have, yeah. I know. I mean, of course, I have a dream that somebody will come and be like, let's do a 4-part. Like, let's do kind of Rosa Parks's America, right? That would be amazing.
Do that.
Yes. Right? Like, thank you. Right? It's like the 20th century, I mean, Black struggle across the 20th century, right? If we start with Scottsboro and then, you know, I mean, one of the things we don't see, right? Rosa Parks comes out against the nomination of Clarence Thomas and writes this very strong statement before even Anita Hill's testimony becomes public, basically saying the Supreme Court is regressing and Thomas represents not progress, but a U-turn on the road. And so, yeah, there's a lot. So, I mean, and then one of the last things I found after 9/11, 8 days after 9/11, she joins with Harry Belafonte, Danny Glover, and a number of civil rights activists to call on the United States to work with the international community to not pursue war, to not pursue retaliation. So there she is, like incredibly prescient, like Belafonte was, like Danny Glover was, about what was ahead. So it's really, again, right, like the Black freedom struggle across the 20th century. Yeah.
Hi. So you're saying these are things that were left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
So there's no way to have like, because sometimes they do outtakes.
I know.
You can't do that.
They were not. We were hoping they were going to be willing to. We wanted to. I mean, that was one of the vision. I mean, there's a lot at Zin Ed Project in terms of the curriculum, but obviously one idea we'd had was like, could we put some of that? There was a whole part on like Septima Clark and Ella Baker, right? Could we put that up? But because they hadn't finished it, it would have cost more money, and so, yeah, we didn't get to, sadly.
So I am, I guess I would call myself an activist and organizer through my children and then my community. And Rosa Parks, when I saw the image of her with the Black Panthers and how they embraced her, was just so awestrucking to me, because we don't have too much intergenerational connections with movements these days. It just seems like the young people has had enough of that generation, which is kind of heartbreaking. So that was very touching to me, and just wanted to know if you can talk a little bit more about her relationship, or the relationship, I guess the Black Panthers, because that's what I saw that kind of helped me through 2020. Thank you.
So one of the things that I really feel like I've learned from Rosa Parks, and particularly watching her in the kind of Black Power era, right? Because then she is, in her 50s, in her 60s, and her spirit is, if I can be useful, I will come, right? Not I will tell you what to do, not I've been there before. If I can be useful, I will come. And so, again, part of what so many people told me, and just seeing all the places that I could see that she, all the different movements she was working with, was that spirit of like, if somebody's doing something useful and I can be of further use, count me in. And I think that is a really useful spirit in terms of thinking about that kind of cross-generational and coming to youth activism, not like I'm going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to let you lead, right? So we saw the People's Tribunal in 1967 in Detroit, right? These are young militants. A. Trap Brown had come to Detroit and was like, basically, the cops killed these 3 teenagers. There's no justice. And then the papers stop kind of reporting on it. And so the idea of the People's Tribunal was at least to like bring the facts of what had happened to light, right? And to tell the actual story of what happens that night. And this is a radical thing. Like the lawyers who participate in it get threatened with being disbarred. They're forced to move. They were going to do it at the Dexter Theater in Detroit, but they're forced to move to Clegg's Church because the theater backs out. They actually hide the witnesses until they testify to the tribunal because there's like threats. And again, her spirit of like, thanks for asking me. And so again, I think that with the Panthers, so she visits the Panther School actually in 1980, and it's like a very moving day. They write a play for her, and so there's these beautiful photos, and we have a couple on the website of like her and Erica Huggins and these young people, and they do a performance, but they're really moved that she's come all the way to Oakland to be with them. And she's very moved by it too. So, but that's in 1980. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of moments where she kind of shows up to support what other people are doing. And in all sorts of ways.
I think that's great. I mean, I actually had written down theater as something that could be a way of engaging young people in learning more about Rosa Parks, is to create theater projects, plays that could be done, to create scripts from the book. I mean, I feel like the realm of creativity is so broad with that. And I also wanted to highlight on the intergenerational piece that there's a project called the SNCC Legacy Project. SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It's a website. They were one of the leading civil rights organizations, and they work very self-consciously with activists across different generations to really listen to each other and to learn, and the learning goes both ways. So if you look up SNCC Legacy Project, SNCC Legacy Project, you'll be able to see some conversations, some summits that happened within and amongst movement activists from different generations. And of course, I think we can all try to be that person to the young people in our lives, to the elders in our lives as well.
I just had a question. Mainly since Rosa Parks just talked about intersectionality, sexual violence, racism, just all of those things related to DEI and social justice. Considering the state of the world in 2023, how do we invoke that revolutionary energy and passion and leadership? Because I think that where we are now, I think it's very concerning, considering I am one of the younger people in the room, and I'm like, this is very existential, and I think that we're really doomed, and I think that sounds really helpless, but I think that we need to have honest conversations like this. So, how do we get a move on things so that we can actually save the world and save humanity?
Thank you. So I'm obviously saying a lot of lessons that I get from Rosa Parks, but the most important lesson that I take from her is the ability to keep going when you can't see that it's going to do anything. I think in the kind of school book version that we're given of Rosa Parks, everybody hears she's courageous, right? But what actually makes Rosa Parks courageous is the fact that she tries and tries and works with other people who try and who try. And we get to December 1st, 1955. She's made stands on the bus before. She's been kicked off the bus before. Other people have made stands before. One of her neighbors was killed for making a stand on the bus. Black women have been raped in police custody. There is nothing to suggest that taking a stand that night is going to do anything but bring harm on her person, which it does. So to me, what she gives us, and this is one of the worst parts of the myth, right? Because I think in the myth, it's like she sits down, people rise up, and then you struggle, and then the injustice. And it's like, no. She did all sorts of things. Other people did all sorts of things. And nothing changes, right? And then they do more things. And then they do more things. And then there's that day. Rosa Parks talks about that Monday, December 5th, being, right, this incredible moment, probably the most important moment for her. And she's so delighted, but then she's also like, why did it take so long? Right? And so I think part of how we deal with this moment we are in that seems so horrible and horrifying, to me, is to try to summon that inner Rosa Parks of like, you just have to make step after step, and you're not going to be able to see it. And then at some point, you are going to take the step that actually breaks it open. But you have to do like a ton of things, and all sorts of things like don't work, and it seems very depressing. And one of my favorite quotes from Rosa Parks is she talks about being arrested as being annoying that night, because she's actually building this like this workshop that weekend for her youth council. And so here she is, she's gotten herself arrested, and she has all this work to do when she gets home to plan for this workshop, right? So in her mind, this is taking her away from the thing that she thinks, you know, and then she's gotten herself arrested. And it's important, right? Because this is a line, and she's like, she basically says, if I got up, it would be like I approved of this treatment, and I did not approve. But still, it's annoying, she says. Mm-hmm. And I think that also shows us, like, we're not going to know the moments, like, until they're long gone, right? And you just, like, part of it is you just trust, like she did, that, like, you just take a step and you take a step, and then those steps will, you know, as again, the anti-apartheid movement used to say, right? Like water on the rock, and the rock is ultimately gone, right? Like you don't see the rock getting worn away, but ultimately it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so powerful. I mean, I thought when I looked at the film that there were so many horrific images as part of it that were hard to take in. Images of police violence and brutality, images, and even the story of Recy Taylor, just taking in what happened to her and her life, the bodies that we saw just on the ground. And I think someone even said something like it was the worst of times, right? And I just feel like there's been so many of those worst of times for us as a people, but we continue to, but still we rise, right? We continue to strategize and put one step in front of the other, because really that's what living is, right? And that's what resistance is. And I think that is part of the story of Rosa Parks' life. I mean, she was blessed to live a long, long, long life. And to be able to look back with her faculties intact, you know, till the end, to be able to look back and recall and enjoy and connect all of the different movement that she connected, I think there is something really powerful in that.
Yes, thank you so much for a wonderful film and for the book. I just had a question. During the film, there was a mention of the attorney Fred Gray. Yeah. And I'm just curious, why wasn't Rosa Parks, why wasn't she chosen as a plaintiff in the case that went before the Supreme Court? Mm-hmm. I believe Claudette Colvin, her name is on the case, yep. Not Rosa Parks. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. Part of it is they had learned things, right? So part of why Fred Gray files that federal case is that Rosa Parks, as we know, was not the first person to resist on the bus. And there was sort of a trickle of people. And a woman by the name of Viola White in 1944 refuses to give up her seat, gets arrested, decides to fight her legal case. In response, police rape her daughter, And then the state ties up her appeal so it never gets heard. So they learn from this. And so in February of 1956, Fred Gray, they basically decide they don't want that to happen, right? And that may be one thing that's going to happen because Rosa Parks' case was in state court. So they file this proactive case into federal court. And so I think there are two reasons why she's not on it. The first is a procedural one. They were worried that the court could just basically make an argument that because her case was in state court, that would take precedence, and they would just be like, we're not going to hear this case. But the second thing is we want to remember, like, one of the reactions to the Brown decision, right, was the red baiting of the NAACP, right? The going after the NAACP as a potentially foreign and communist organization. Rosa Parks has this whole history, right? She joins the NAACP and becomes secretary in 1943, so we have that dozen years. By June of 1956, the NAACP will be outlawed in the state of Alabama. So I think the second part of the reason that Rosa Parks is not on that federal case, so 4 women. Gray actually wants a minister, and no ministers are willing to do it. 4 women, including 2 teenagers, Claudette Colvin and Mary Louise Smith. So I think one of the other lessons of this is really the courage of teenagers. Step forward. But again, I think there's both the procedural reason why Gray is worried, and I think there's also the fear that her long history could get exposed as a way to discredit them. And so she's not on the federal case. That federal case is called Browder v. Gale, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court.
Powerful. Oh, hi, thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Did I say your name right, Dr. Theoharis?
Theoharis, yeah.
Yes, thank you. This is awesome. I mean, I was like crying. I'm like, am I the only one crying sitting here? I'm age 69, so I'm kind of a little bit of a walking history book too. I was born in 1953.
Yeah.
I remember when the girls, my dad was an Alabama man. I used to sit and listen to stories and watch on TV the water hoses. But what I wanted to kind of just offer to any of young people that are here, when we look at history, like you were saying, Dr. Harris, we should look at it in like segments of time. If you look at Rosa Parks, there were 2 pictures behind her. One of them was Harriet Tubman on the right, and on the left, you had Sojourner Truth. And these people preceded her in the struggle. So they all draw from who came before them. And when you're young, like you're only in your 20s or what have you, you just haven't lived, no offense, but you just haven't lived long enough to see the progress. I mean, Harriet Tubman was a big deal, Did those people ever think they would ever come out of that particular bondage? So, it's a progression. It's, so we all get on this movement when we do, and we do what we can in our time span. And if we're blessed to live long enough, we will see the progress of our time period in contrast to what preceded us. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
We have time for one final question, if anyone wanted to approach the mic. Well, it helps the people on the live stream, but thanks for your patience with that. Yeah.
Hi. It's not a question, it's a comment. I think that as Black people, various ages, we tend to think that no one is doing anything, it's the end of the world, there's no leaders. But there are so many leaders out there that are doing various things, whether it is through making sure that our history is not being banned. As far as books are concerned, they're fighting for housing rights for people in the community. They're doing a lot of things. And even a lot of young people are out there are literally fighting for the community. Just because they're not named, you know, they may not be as famous as our beloved ancestor of Rosa Parks, but there are people out there. And if you are willing to do the work, you will find the people. You just have to put yourself out there and find these people and put it in your mind that, you know what, if I'm gonna make the change, I gotta put myself out there. And the reason why I said that, one of the beautiful things I loved about this documentary, it showed cooperative economics. When the people decided to boycott the bus system in Montgomery, they created their own economic system and actually created jobs for Black people to drive the people to work. And people were able to save coins in their pocket as well, and probably had used that in a way to even feed their family. And so that is happening in New York. As a matter of fact, last night in Brooklyn, I was at a meeting, and in central Brooklyn, between Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, in those particular communities, Black people had actually established a Black-owned cooperative supermarket. So the only way, you cannot go into that supermarket unless, you cannot buy products from that supermarket unless you live in the community, because they wanted the food coming from Black farmers, and they wanted the money to go back to Black farmers, but also the people in the community work at the supermarket and not only work there, but they own the supermarket as well. So let's not think that this is not happening. It is happening all around us. We just have to stop looking at social media as a way to save us and really start talking to our neighbors, our elders, our young people, our 5-year-olds, our 7-year-olds. Ask the 8-year-old what are their ideas of what's going on around them and what they can do. And that's what Miss Rosa Parks has shown throughout her life. She worked with everyone and not just with the elders, and didn't criticize the youth or anyone else, except that, like she said, if it's worth it, I'm here, I'm willing to do the work, as long as you're willing to do the work. That's my comment.
Perfect, thank you. That is the perfect final word on Rosa Parks. We appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for supporting Conversation in Black Freedom Studies. Thank you for supporting the Schomburg Library overall. We're here the first Thursday of every month. If we're not here in this room, which we won't be until January again, we're out there virtually, so you can enjoy the program of scholars who've written books and activists who continue to challenge the status quo, and others in conversation.
Yeah, in November, we're going to be online. It's November, the first Thursday of November is...
I'll tell you in a moment.
And our program is going to be on kind of the long history of kind of surveillance and political repression. And we're going to have Sharice Burton-Stelly and Lerone Martin and Adam Elliott talking about kind of the FBI and policing and red baiting and also British policing, like anti-Black policing. So we're going to have this in also a global, but we're going to be online for that conversation.
Yes, The Politics of Political Repression, a virtual discussion showcasing 3 fabulous new books that dive into histories of law enforcement repression from local police to the FBI to help us to contextualize our current political moment. So don't forget to follow us at @SchomburgCBFS. Don't forget to take on the role of becoming a teacher, a student, a learner, a co-conspirator. Share what you've learned about Rosa Parks. Go online, look at the materials there. Perfect thing for family night, perfect thing to share with someone, even just randomly on the train. I think it's a movement to think about the power of this education.
Excuse me, I just want to add one thing. Thanks for the documentary. And I am in an organization fighting for tenants' rights, and we are following Rosa to fight for tenants' rights. Thank you.
All right, right on.
Oh, great.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much. Oh, there are books in the bookstore.
Yes.